Hey, Darren from the White Hatter, and today's Thinkable Thursday, we're going to be talking to Chief Constable Del Manak of the Victoria Police Department, also known as the VicPD, where we're going to be talking to him about what are they doing to help deal with the COVID-19 and how they're using social media to accomplish some of those goals. And welcome to Thinkable Thursday. And it is my pleasure today to be interviewing my ex-boss, Chief Del Manak from the Victoria Police Department. Yes, I served with the Victoria Police Department for 30 years. I retired almost 4 years ago now. Time has just flown. And Chief Manak is with the Victoria Police Department. A really cool website. For those of you who are watching, check out their website. It is amazing, some of the things they're doing in social media. So why don't I bring Chief Manak into the discussion? There he is. And look at this, you know, we're using Skype to connect to interview. I mean, some of the cool things that COVID is causing us to do. Chief, maybe you can share with our audience a little bit more about yourself, who you are, and those types of things.
Yeah, sure. First off, thanks for having me on, Darren. And looking at you, if things go sideways, be ready to put your uniform on. We might have you back at work sooner than you think. So I started my career in the Vancouver Police Department for about 3.5 years. I actually couldn't get hired here in Victoria. They were hiring so few police officers back in the early 90s. But I'm in my 30th year. 26 plus years here in Victoria. I'm born and raised here in Victoria, so I have a strong connection to this community and this police department. And certainly the department's gone through many challenges, as most public agencies and police departments do across the country, with budget cuts and other pressures and changing crime. But we're doing the best we can, and I'm so proud of the people in our organization. And I got to say, it's a real tremendous honor for me to serve this organization and to be the leader.
You know, I've really been looking forward to this interview because we have thousands and thousands of followers. And it's interesting when I read social media and look into social media, how there's a lot of disinformation out there about what first responders like the police are doing during this with this pandemic that we're all facing right now, and how we're all, chipping in to do our part to flatten that curve. So this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to interview. So I'm really looking forward to this. So why don't we start with our questions? So the first question to you, Chief, is right here. And the question is, I know that there was a lot of pre-planning on the part of VicPD to prepare for COVID-19. What processes have you put in place to ensure the VicPD could still function during this event? An example, what if your department had a large number of members go down because of COVID-19? So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
Of course, it's a global pandemic, which makes it a lot more serious. But I can assure you that the Victoria Police Department and police agencies across Canada are prepared for any type of emergency. We have business continuity plans that are in place. It could be a horrific critical incident, similar to one that played out in Nova Scotia a couple weeks ago. It could be a natural disaster, a tsunami, an earthquake. And so police departments have these plans. Of course, none of those plans are specific enough. So what we do is we basically pull out the plan, which is what we did with COVID, and we dust it off, and then we really look at the framework of that plan and how that can be applied in the current situation. So we were fortunate enough that our leadership team did that quite early on. When we saw what was happening in Wuhan, China, and how it was spreading across Asia and across Europe, we started to really pay attention before many other agencies and organizations were paying attention. And so our business continuity plans really allowed us to basically brush things off that we already had, but also adapt to what we knew. And of course, the information was ever changing in how the virus was spread, and the fact that you could be asymptomatic for a period of time and not know that you have the virus and you're spreading it. So what we did is we really looked at our operations of our police department, and we divided it up into two categories. One was your frontline policing. So when somebody calls 911 and it is an emergency, what service do we need to provide, and we ought to provide, and the public expect, so that the police are there supporting them. The second one was every other section that supports frontline policing. So what we did there is, as most organizations, we started really looking at how many people we could actually take from the workplace and have them work from home. So we had a really robust plan where those who had the ability to work from home, we could kind of get them to work from home. Of course, the goal here, as we all know, was to slow down the spread of the virus. We knew we couldn't stop it, but we could certainly do our part in slowing it down. The next part was making sure that our frontline officers, those that couldn't work from home, had the proper personal protective equipment so that they were safe when they did their job.
And so obviously you have a full stock of PPE. We all know what PPE now stands for, right? Yeah, obviously I know that when I was there, we had a good stock anyways, but I would imagine that you kind of upgraded the entire stock.
Yeah, we did. We were lucky because we already had they're called P100 respirators. So we had these masks to go into scenes, that could be toxic or there's biological concerns or hazards. Also for smoke and for our emergency response and our crowd management teams. Yeah. So we already had people in our organization that were already fit tested. So we had the proper equipment. But I'll tell you, we didn't have enough of it. We didn't have any surgical masks, which offer a layer of protection, which is much lower than a P100 respirator. However, can be a lot easier to don off and doff off. We wanted to just make sure that when it came to just even the isogel and all your cleaning supplies, we just didn't have enough of that. So we were basically stuck with every other organization trying to purchase and acquire important PPE. And of course, when you're in policing, we have a number of risks and hazards that the general public or organizations, many organizations wouldn't have. For example, we're arresting people that are high risk. We're going into high risk locations. So our police vehicles, our jail cells, and our jail facility has to have a deep cleaning and a kind of a rotation where we want to make sure that the virus isn't spread unnecessarily in those high touch, high risk areas, which required us to kind of revamp what we saw. And also we had to create decontamination areas. So if an officer was into that environment where they felt that they may have been impacted by COVID-19, how do we decontaminate that officer, their vehicle, and make sure that they're not unnecessarily shedding the virus onto other fellow officers?
And is it a standard procedure now that when members are out of the car dealing with public that they're wearing a mask now, or are you kind of leaving it up to the members to make that decision?
Sure. So that we've been guided by, we're fortunate enough that we're guided by our medical evidence. And we have Dr. Mark Vu, who is our chief medical officer.
Great guy.
Yeah. And he understands policing because we've worked with Dr. Vu in many areas before this pandemic hit. So we had kind of that relationship built with Dr. Vu, and he understood policing. So I would say that eye protection is huge. So we were really making sure that our officers had long sleeves, they're wearing disposable latex gloves, and they were wearing eye protection. Masks, we left optional for when they were at a location which had a high risk of being COVID positive, or they felt that they're dealing with somebody who may be COVID positive. So masks are still optional, but the key is we give our officers enough of the tools so they have them at the ready if and when they feel that they need to don those PPEs.
And that makes total sense, Chief. And the other really cool thing I saw here in Greater Victoria, as well as communities across the country, where other businesses came in to support. So I know that there was a local distillery, as an example, that created hand sanitizer that they gave to first responders like yourselves for free. Have you received any other PPE from other community participants?
Yes, we have. We've had many local businesses and organizations who did even acquire PPE. Like you said, there's two areas. One is some businesses that adapted during COVID-19 and said, okay, we're not going to be able to do our core business, but here's what we can do to help first responders and our medical health professionals. And we've certainly had help in that area. But other areas, stores and other retail outlets, when they did acquire PPE, and of course there was that first little delay where
Yep.
everyone wanted it. And there
Yep.
just wasn't enough. So we really tried to ration it as much as we could to our frontline officers. And but now there's greater supply, and we've been fortunate. Again, Darren, you know this. Again, you talked about serving in the Victoria Police Department for 30 plus years. You know that our communities come together, and
They
our
do.
communities do support the police department and other first responders, and it's so good to see in times like this.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if there was one thing that the VicPD has done really well is the community connections, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But next question I have for you, Chief. How is the VicPD using social media during this pandemic? Interesting question.
Oh, great. Well, what Darren, you of all people know the importance of social media, the reach that you can have, and the influence that you can have. I would say that there's been a lot of misinformation on social media, and it's just unfortunate that there's no fact checking and there's no medical science behind some of the comments that are made. And as you very well know, that information can be quite dangerous, because if it's repeated multiple times and shared multiple times, that becomes the narrative. However, there's no real truth to whatever those comments might be. So we use social media to communicate with our folks and our communities on a regular basis, many fronts. One is letting them know that the police department is operational, that we're out in the community, and we're there to kind of serve the public. Second is correcting any misinformation, letting them know that our calls for service and how we responded changed and adapted. We were going to less calls because more calls were now being answered over the phone. So we wanted our community to know you may not see a police officer in person on certain types of calls, but here's why. Mm-hmm. And it's to protect you. It's to protect the officers. And we're going to try to do the best job that we can. And also the fact that you talked about masks, if our officers choose in a particular situation to don on a mask, then the public knows why we're doing that, and it's for our safety and the safety of the public. So it's sharing information. Government was coming out pretty much every couple of weeks, introducing new legislation. There was these public health orders. There was a quarantine act. There's many legislative additions that were made. So the public was confused. What can the police enforce? What are they enforcing? And of course, Darren, to complicate matters, different provinces were enacting legislation at different rates. Yeah. And so you hear something happening across Canada and think that, well, why aren't the police here in BC or in Victoria enforcing some of these restrictions? And of course, we wanted to communicate with the public to let them know why we weren't, or what process to follow if we were going to follow up on some of these complaints.
I know the VicPD has done a really good job in the area of social media. I mean, and we were one of the first in Canada to really start harnessing it and using it for what it's worth. But a really good example was just recently that suspicious package that was in Fernwood, and how you use social media with your social media liaison officer to kind of keep the public updated, because they want to know, right? And what better way to do it than social media? Right.
And the other thing, Darren, is our citizens, they want to help us.
Yeah.
They want to be a part of the crime fighting. So, when we're not only are we letting the public know what we're dealing with and why there's evacuation of that immediate area for that suspicious package, but we showed pictures of the toolbox. We asked, here's a description, here's a vehicle description. Mm-hmm. Does anybody know this person? Do they recognize the vehicle? Yeah. And so in many cases, we actually have the public be our eyes and ears, and they give us a tremendous amount of information. So social media really is huge, and it's a new way of doing business. And again, we find it so helpful in keeping our community safe.
Yeah, Sir Robert Peel said the policing are the community and the community are policing, right? And so what better way to get the community involved in helping us fight crime together than using social media to do that? And again, I know the VicPD has really led the charge on this for many years. Next question I have for you, Chief, is Policing in isolation just doesn't work, especially during an event like COVID-19. Who are some of the community partners you are working with to help cope with some of the challenges that the City of Victoria and the municipality of Esquimalt faces? Again, I think it's important when people hear VicPD, they think Victoria City, where in fact we police two communities, right? Victoria as well as the municipality of Esquimalt. So what are your thoughts on that question?
Sure. We say this often, that we cannot do it all. We need the public support. We need the public's helps. And we also need the help of our community partners and other community leaders. So when it came to the pandemic, we quite quickly partnered with the township of Esquimalt in their emergency operations center, and also the City of Victoria, who had a separate emergency operations center. So we're embedded right in there with bylaw, with fire, with engineering, parks, all the other city departments in both of these municipalities. And it was important that we do our share when it comes to public safety, but partnering and making sure that there's consistency and that we know exactly what one agency is doing to support another agency provides better service for our community, and it keeps our communities healthy and safe. And it really allowed us to even talk about PPE, talk about what information we're sharing, how we're deploying in whatever area we're deploying in, and what role we can play in supporting each other, as our goal is the same, which is to try to keep our citizens safe and to try to make sure that they have the right information. And those businesses that are open have the opportunity to operate as safely as possible. So some of the other agencies, I would say that, especially during the encampments at Topaz Park and as the 900 block and the Pandora corridor grew, our service providers, the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness, working with AIDS Vancouver Island and with other service providers was really, really critical, in addition to the fire department, our ambulance partners, and also bylaw.
Yeah, I think this is really important. I mean, it's kind of an interesting position we find ourselves in, or your department finds themselves in, where you got the township of Esquimalt and Victoria, and each has their own EOC, Emergency Operations Center. So as a result of that, you've embedded members, probably your OICs or your inspector in charge of the Esquimalt Township, probably into, I would suspect, into that Emergency Operations Center. And the Emergency Operations Centers are primarily for the first responders, right?
Yes, there's different layers. So there's a layer of governance, and if you need to, have funding and you need to acquire certain resources that help the Emergency Operations Center. So there's planning, there's logistics, there's actually a media component to it, and of course there's operations. So there's different arms within and different groups within the Emergency Operations Center, and then there's the logistics chief, and then they report up. So there's a hierarchy and a structure. Which really, really works well, because otherwise you're spinning your wheels and you don't have time to get it wrong, and you don't have time for there to be overlap and delays in what one arm might be doing and not knowing what another division or section might be trying to do. So it's really important to kind of coordinate your response from a city perspective, and of course the police department is a major part of that.
So are the EOCs right now in both the city and the township, are they operating right now 7 days a week, or is that how it's working? And do you connect once a day to update everybody? Like, I think you probably have a meeting today, correct?
Sure. Yeah. So not today. So here's what's happened. So we were watching, again, where this virus was going and the spread of this virus in the community. So we were really trying to be week to 2 weeks ahead. So but we knew we were a week and a half to 2 weeks behind Vancouver. So whatever we were seeing here, we weren't just watching that. We were looking at areas where the virus had spread through community and where we may be in a week or 2 weeks' time. And then, of course, our preparation was based on that. So when it comes to the frequency of the EOC meetings, we started off having meetings 3 times a week to 5 times a week. And for a period, we're now into 8-9 weeks now for the COVID-19 and the pandemic. But in the height of this, There were meetings 7 days a week.
Wow.
Even on Saturdays and Sundays, even through the Easter long weekend, because it was that important, because changes were happening so rapidly that you couldn't wait to take a day off. You just be behind, and then now you're playing catch up, and we certainly didn't want to do that. But as of now, Darren, I know that for the EOC, and I'm not there, Inspector Keith Lidner is our rep on both the township and the city EOCs. I think they've now downgraded to maybe once a week or twice a week. Mm-hmm. However, they're ready to scale up if the virus takes off again, and we need to increase those frequency of those meetings.
And that's why I asked that question, because I think what you just shared with the viewing audience is that there was a lot of proper pre-planning going into place, right? Like, people just don't see what is happening behind the scenes for first responders. It's not as if you're not doing anything. You're doing a lot. It's just that the general public doesn't see that. Right? Next question I have for you is right here. And it's, has the VicPD or any other PDs here in Greater Victoria experienced a member who has contracted COVID-19? And what is your protocol to deal with such an event?
Sure. So the answer is no. We
good.
have not had it. That's excellent.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is through the advice of our Chief Medical Director, Dr. Vu, and making sure that our officers were wearing the proper PPE, that they were safe going into some of these situations. And the other thing was, and Darren, you know this because you've led many briefings with your D-Watch, well before your retirement, and actually serving the frontline members. Well, what we did is physical distancing was so important that what we didn't want to have happen is that the officers would have this heightened level of awareness and practicing all the proper hand hygiene and all the other steps taken outside of the police building. We wanted to make sure that they knew that as soon as they even stepped in the building, they were just as much at risk to spreading the virus to fellow officers. So having that physical distancing, moving workstations, as I mentioned earlier, moving a lot of people to work from home created some of the spaces for people who couldn't work from home to actually spread out. So when it comes time to COVID, we were lucky and fortunate that as of today, we have not had a positive test for any of our officers or anybody in the Capital Regional District. I can share with you that one of the agencies on the mainland did have an officer that tested positive. And in speaking to that chief, it really had a psychological impact. Mm-hmm. You want to protect the privacy of individuals with medical information, and whether this one agency, word spread on social media, on social media like wildfire, and what ended up happening is the organization almost came to a grinding halt. So what happened is the department immediately shared information that the officer was okay, who the officer was, and the key there, Darren, is to support the family. Many of us know that we're on the front lines. We may be subjected to some sort of illness or injury. What we worry about, though, is our families. Mm-hmm. And so in this particular case, this organization did a really good job of supporting the member, but also buying them groceries, making sure that they were isolated and that their family was also supported, which then sharing that information with the membership brings a level of anxiety down for everyone, because they feel that, okay, if this happens, then I'm going to be looked after and supported. And then, of course, they celebrated when the member came back. Luckily, this member had only mild symptoms. And when they came back, they actually had this member do a video for the membership to show, here's what I felt, here's what happened, here's how I got healthy, here's how the department supported me.
Great idea.
And hearing it, not from the chief, but from the member. And of course, this organization shared the video of that member with all other agencies, and we actually shared it with our membership, so they could see that if you have COVID, although you hear about the one-offs and all the the small percentages where healthy people are passing away, that generally speaking, your symptoms are going to be mild, and you are going to recover, and you can be right back at work quite quickly.
Yeah, it's amazing to me when I look at social media how many other departments are really battling with this struggle right now, right? Where they have a lot of membership who have gone down. And it's amazing to me. I think primarily because here on the West Coast, we had lots of time to prepare for this, right? And as a result of that, by taking the appropriate actions that you did with the members of the VicPD to help minimize the shedding of COVID and catching it was spectacular. Just a side note, it's really surprising to me that we don't see more of our homeless population with COVID-19. I know that you're working with a lot of the care providers in the down. Like, what are they thinking? What's going on? Like, it really, I'll be honest, it really surprises me.
Yeah, it surprises me as well, and I'm quite thankful that they haven't got it, because I will tell you, I am up at Topaz Park literally 3, 4, 5 times a week, where I can find. I've been regularly up there from the time the camp got set up, and Reverend Al Pizik was up there from the Dandelion Society, and there was no even infrastructure up at Topaz Park, to now the decampment process. And certainly I've been in the Pandora corridor, and there's many challenges with this population. They just, many people are severely ill. They're in pain, they need help, they need assistance, they have substance use challenges, they have mental health and addictions, severe and persistent mental health, and they just can't self-isolate. They don't have the ability to maintain any type of physical distancing. And so I'm actually quite surprised that the virus hasn't spread through our street community. I'm quite thankful. I know that our service providers are there they're daily. They have health support, street nurses, and anybody who shows any symptoms is isolated as best as possible. But I actually thought that it would have spread through the street community much quicker, and I'm just glad that it hasn't.
I think a lot of credit goes to the outreach, the social outreach teams that are out there that are looking after these people right now. And like you say, if they identify somebody, quickly getting them isolated to help stop the spread, right? But it absolutely amazes me, because I thought for sure that's where it would really take hold because of the circumstances they find themselves in. But it just hasn't, which is a blessing, like you say, to us. And the other thing I had heard through the grapevine was that the VicPD had actually planned that if members were going down, some of us retired members may have gotten a call to come back to service, right? And I actually sent an email to the department saying, hey, listen, I'm here. Like, if you need somebody to help you into a supporting role, this dripping boomer, would be there to help if needed.
Yeah. So we had a 7-phase plan. We still have a 7-phase plan. So what we did is we looked at, again, it's our business continuity plan. So we looked at if our officers start contracting COVID and they are now self-isolated for this 14-day period, what are we going to do to maintain police operations on the front lines? And so we had 7 different phases where sections and units that we would collapse to put to the front lines so that we could deliver policing services. And in that step, towards the end, but in that step was exactly what you say, Darren, which is reaching out to retired members and saying, would you be willing and able, and are you in a position where you could come back to serve because we need those resources. So, you have to always plan for the worst. You hope you don't need to get there. But the planning, because the public would expect that. We can't react when a situation happens and then try to flick a switch on. We've got to have those contingency plans in place well in advance.
And I can tell you, I stay in contact with a lot of people who are retired, and there were a number of us that were ready to come back if the call was made, for sure. I mean, although I'm retired, I still bleed blue, right? And I would be there to help as best as I could.
Some of you, not you, Darren, but some of you would have required a haircut, but we would have.
How true. Next question I have for you, Chief, is what calls for service have you seen increase as a result of COVID-19, and what calls for service have you seen decrease as a result of COVID-19?
Sure. So increase. So criminals, how opportunistic they are. They adapted quite quickly when businesses started to close, and they knew that they couldn't do their traditional shoplifting. And so increases in commercial break and enters. So we really work with the other partner. One of the partners I forgot to mention was the Downtown Victoria Business Association.
Yeah, DVBA.
And the Chamber. the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
So we did work with the Downtown Victoria Business Association and really went to businesses and encouraged them to remove any valuable that is within the window to prevent these easy smash and grabs, where a van pulls up or a truck pulls up or even somebody on a bike just smashes a window, grabs what they can and leaves the scene. So we asked those valuables to be removed. We asked people to paper their walls. So what you don't see is not going to tempt criminals from breaking in. So we saw increases in construction site break and enters. A lot of the tradespeople leave tools.
Yeah.
They're expensive tools. They can garner pretty good money on the black market. And so we saw increases in theft of bicycles. And you got to remember, when we're talking bikes, some of these e-bikes are worth up to $10,000 now.
Yeah.
It's not just your 10-speed bike that's it's worth a couple $100.
Yeah.
People really invest in their bikes, not just e-bikes, but in also road bikes and whatnot. So we saw increases in commercial break and enters to construction sites, hardware stores for sure, because they were one of the ones that were open. Liquor stores. We have seized tremendous amounts of liquor because liquor stores are one of the businesses that have remained open. Yeah. And as I mentioned, increases in bike thefts and whatnot. Decreases, I would say that we haven't seen a lot of decrease, to be honest. The other increase, we've seen is mental health. As we know, dealing with COVID can be challenging. None of us are in our normal. And so we're all trying to adjust to a new normal. We all have levels of stress, anxiety. Some of us have lost jobs. Some of us are struggling to perhaps pay our rent or even put food on the table for our families. So if you have people who have depression or anxiety or any type of mental health concerns or issues, it's not easy for people to cope. So what happened is we did see a slight increase in our mental health calls where people feel suicidal, they feel depressed. And of course, we wanted to make sure that we got them to help. When it came to the reductions, some reductions in assaults, we actually didn't see an increase and a slight reduction even in domestic violence.
Yeah,
we actually thought.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah,
sure. Okay.
Is one of the things I think was cool was I noticed in your social media feeds that your strike force team seemed to have pivoted to property crime offenders. I'm hypothesizing primarily because you saw this increase, right?
Yes, that's exactly what we did. We have an obligation to keep our community safe. And when we saw increases in property crime, what we did is we repurposed our strike force unit to, which are undercover officers who are able to adjust. And we really have hit a home run. The numbers, and you see the results. They're literally seizing truckloads of property. And this is, you got to think about each one of these tools, bikes, whatever it is, or barbecue, or whatever it might be. Somebody's been a victim of a crime, and they, and the feeling that they're left with. When we're able to at least recover this property, and of course it's all traded for drugs. Yeah. Drug prices have gone up significantly on the street with the closure of borders and ports. In fact, drug prices have almost doubled. And so there's a level of desperation for many people who are addicted. So now you've got to commit twice as much crime to try to support your drug habit. And so that's where we've really been advocating with Island Health to actually introduce safe supply and to help people kind of take that edge off so they're not having to commit survival crime to support a drug habit, because it really is a health issue.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think one of the things as well is I love how you're now using your social media platforms to shine a light on how Strike Force is actually out there doing things to help fight this. Because again, those would normally be things that maybe the public don't see a lot of. And so I think it was really important, and the VicPD did a really good job and is continuing to do a good job to shine a light on what it is that you're doing to help target those who are preying upon those of us who are home isolating and maybe not at businesses anymore, and therefore these businesses become more vulnerable, right, because of crimes of opportunity. Which kind of dovetails nicely or segues nicely into this next question I have for you, which is right here, Chief. You know, one fear that I had as a result of all of us social and physical distancing at home is that we would see an increase in domestic violence calls for service. Has the VicPD seen such a spike in these types of calls for service? Because, you know, I'm hearing from colleagues of mine across this country in the United States that because we're all home isolating, tensions are going up, and therefore calls for service for domestic assaults, abuses have gone up. What has been your experience as the VicPD?
We actually anticipated that we would probably see an increase, but that doesn't take away from the fact that many people live in relationships that are quite abusive, whether they're physically abusive or psychologically abusive. And intimate partner violence is a real concern. And here's the challenge with COVID. With everyone asked to stay at home, work from home, and it actually can magnify that problem significantly. There's children. Many children are high risk and are in abusive relationships. Again, either physically or psychologically, they don't have the outlet now where they can go to school or they can leave that toxic environment. So we actually did have a lot of concern in increase in intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and in some of the calls that we would see. It hasn't actually materialized. It hasn't gone down significantly, but it certainly didn't spike the way that we thought it would.
And speaking to other chiefs in the province, which I know you do, are they experiencing the same thing here in BC? Like it really hasn't spiked, or?
It hasn't spiked. Yeah, in talking to my colleagues across BC, now it hasn't gone down. It hasn't gone down.
Yeah,
but we're not seeing an increase. But you know, a lot of COVID-related domestics, though, COVID-related, where one partner really is taking this seriously, another partner thinks it's a hoax, doesn't want to practice social distancing, and wants to go out. So a lot of COVID-related domestics and alcohol-related. As you know, it's widely reported, you know, alcohol sales went up considerably. Well, when there's less to do, people are drinking a little more. When you drink, usually that's going to lead to some domestic. So we have seen domestics related to alcohol and COVID like as being an issue with partners, but not huge spikes across the province.
How about on spikes of people reporting to the police about online predation of children? Have you seen a spike in that at all coming to the police department?
No, we haven't seen that. Now, Darren, you of all people know that just because we're not seeing it reported, it doesn't mean that it's not occurring. So I think I'd be naive to say that it's not occurring, but we have not seen reports to police increase in that area.
That's another interesting one, right? Because, you know, I know that Montreal has reported out, and a couple other departments across Canada reported out that they have anecdotally seen an increase, right, in some of those crimes. So it's interesting, right? BC, we're, you know, Victoria Police Department not experiencing COVID to any great degree. Domestics haven't really risen. So it's kind of interesting here on the West Coast. Things are a little different. I wonder, it must be something in the water or the air here on the West Coast, right? Next question I have for you. Next question I have for you is homelessness in Victoria is a challenge for every community across Canada, and Victoria is no different. What has been the VicPD strategy to cope with some of these challenges? I mean, I drove down the Pandora Street corridor, and for everybody who's watching, it's a place where a lot of our social services will gather. About 2 weeks ago, and there were just hundreds of tents, right, on the boulevard and then Topaz Park. So I'm just wondering, what is VicPD doing right now?
Sure. So first, I wanted to start off with that. You know, policing has changed considerably. You know, enforcement is something that's important for the police department, but it's not all that we do. We are in there helping and supporting individuals, especially the people that are most vulnerable in our communities. And, you know, the general public won't know that. So if they drive down the Pandora corridor or go up to the encampment at Topaz Park, they just see a number of individuals and they might paint them with the same brush. Well, the police department knows these individuals. Many of those individuals we know on a first name basis. We know who's vulnerable. We know who's marginalized. We also know who the criminals are who are interacting and preying on our most vulnerable. So it's really, really important that the public kind of understand that the police are in there in a support role, but a lot of it is actually getting people the wraparound services and the help that they need. So, we're working with our partner agencies, whether it's the Coalition to End Homelessness, whether it's Island Health, whether it's BC Housing, especially during this decampment process, as we're trying to find hotel rooms and homes for people and move them into more stable settings rather than being out in the public in camping in camping roughly.
Yeah, I mean that's a very fair comment, Chief. I think people lose sight of the fact that policing is more than policing in today's world, and the VicPD as a department I've known for years has really taken on that type of an attitude with respect to, yeah, we have a job to do, which is enforce the criminal code and bylaws and those types of things, but we also have a bigger responsibility, which is to connect with our community, right? And I think the VicPD has done a really good job. It's like you say, your teams, and I know that you have some special teams that deal with that population as well, know everybody by their first name. And in fact, contrary to what a lot of people believe, a lot of those people actually do look forward to talking to those officers every day and interacting with them every day. Like, again, I think it's so important that we don't paint that entire population with the same brush.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, Darren. And many of them, there's kind of a code on the street. Yeah, and so, you don't want to be seen as being friendly to the police or talking to the police, and you could be a rat. Yeah. If you're giving the police information as to who those individuals are who are preying on the most vulnerable, and these situations play out every single day, 24 hours. But our officers are told on a regular basis in private, thank you for being here. I can't say it to you, but I really, really appreciate you being here. I feel safer. We have our critics that say, "Oh, when the police are there, you're traumatizing people," because many people do have bad experiences with police, and I'm not taking that away. But there's many, many people who have really good, positive experiences with police. They actually feel safe when the police are around. They just don't have a voice, and their voice is silenced if they do speak up, because they'll be ostracized from the rest of that street community if they're seen as supporting the police. But we know what happens, and it's something that the public probably doesn't know.
I mean, as you know, I spent most of my career front lines, right? Beat, bike, those types of issues. And that comment is so right on topic, right? Although they may not say so publicly, privately, a lot of them will come forward and just say, hey, you know what? I just want to thank you for being here. I mean, you're a person I can talk to, all those types of things. So very fair comment. Next question I have for you, Chief, is right here. And what have been some of the lessons learned thus far from a policing perspective, specific to how policing is responding to COVID-19? What do you think?
Sure. So a couple things. One is when you prepare, you can never prepare quick enough, and the execution of the plan is never quite how you did it on paper. So
most plans don't survive first contact.
Exactly, Darren. And so learning those lessons and knowing that you might have the best plan on paper, but when you go to execute it, it may not actually come out the way that you planned. So just being prepared to make those adjustments kind of during the time is important. I would say that the other thing that we've also learned is being prepared with PPE. So again, there was a gap in us not having the proper personal protective equipment. We're going to do the best job we can to kind of have that. But again, COVID kind of hit us at the stage where the world was all looking for that proper PPE. It wasn't just one region or one country, and then there were some challenges in sourcing that. But the other thing I wanted to say is, these are the final two comments on this topic: the importance of public safety during these times. So it's been highlighted to us. And here's what the police offer, which many other organizations perhaps don't. They offer our communities with hope, with comfort, and with encouragement. And so we were really talking to our officers, and as much as we said, maintain your physical distance and obviously be safe for yourselves and for the community, because we don't unnecessarily want to spread the virus. Mm-hmm. However, be in the community. When people see you, whether you're riding a bike, walking the beat, or driving in a car, smile at people, wave at people, they want that hope and encouragement and comfort, knowing that the police are out, keeping them safe. And I think we've kind of learned that and the importance of that. And of course, at 7 o'clock every night, as much as we are paying a tribute to all healthcare workers and professionals, it's also meant for all first responders and all essential workers as well. And of course, the police are a part of that group.
I think what you need to do is that one part of your statement there where you just said that police are seen to be the pillar. I think you need to create and frame that somewhere in your office, because no truer words have ever been spoken, in my opinion. And I'll be honest with you, it's the first time I've heard that from a police executive such as yourself, and it's right on target, in my opinion, right? I mean, if the VicPD or any police department, for better lack of terms, loses it, right, and they're out of control and in a panic mode, then that is going to be very reflective to the community. And guess what? The community is going to follow suit. So I think the police department becoming that pillar, like you say, during a critical incident like this or any other critical incident is so very important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, second to last question I have for you, Chief, and here it is right here, is what do you believe are some of the organizational challenges post-COVID-19 that the VicPD will face? I mean, a really good example of that is I've been hearing in the news across our country right now how some city councils are talking about post-COVID, because of the costing factors with respect to income, that cuts are going to start taking place primarily to potentially first responders, police, fire, all those things that, taxes and stuff go into to fund. So are those some concerns to you as a department, and how are you preparing for some of those things?
Sure, absolutely. So you touched on the biggest one. The biggest one is going to be budgets. There's no way that, I'll speak for even the township and the city of Victoria, for the Victoria Police Department, there's been significant shortfalls in revenue that has not been generated. The city of Victoria, I haven't heard from the township, but I know that the city of Victoria came out and said that due to some of the economic hardship for the citizens of Victoria, that they were going to hold the tax increase for this year to 0%. And it was in the 3.5%, or I'm not going to get it right there, but that's a significant shortfall now in revenues that the city is going to generate. So the next shoe that drops then is a discussion amongst the city to go, well, how much money did we have in our contingency, and will that cover the shortfall, or do we go to each city department and now ask you to revise your budget, and you got to sharpen your pencil, and we want some of the money that we originally approved back because of our shortfall in revenue. So I'm prepared for that. We've already started actually asking all of our managers to go through their budgets, their divisional budgets, look at each line item and see where there's a savings. Because as you know, with no travel, no training, there's many things that we were unable to do that we had budgeted for. So is there potential savings that we can actually pool together and say to the city proactively, here's the money that we feel we can give back, because we're actually not going to use it because of COVID. We won't be needing it. However, here's the challenge. We also have had significant expenses, which we didn't budget for COVID. All of the personal protective equipment that we've purchased, we're looking at setting up, and we have set up decontamination stations. We've had to increase and pay for extra janitorial staff to keep those high-touch, high-risk areas cleaned more frequently. And so, our radio system, Darren, as you know, as a watch commander, we are now pooling our radios. Well, we couldn't pool our radios and our boom mics and our earpieces for officers, and we wanted to give each individual officer their own boom mic. Well, there's $50,000 right there as a result of COVID, where we don't want contaminated equipment, not sanitized properly to be used by other officers. So there's costs that we've incurred, but we're going to balance it to the savings that we've had. And these are real discussions that we're having with our councils moving forward. And again, this is playing itself out, not just even across Canada, but even across the world.
Yeah, for sure. People are saying, I can't wait to return to normal. My opinion is, it won't, it's going to be the new normal. Like, this is going to have significant impact on budgets, or like you say, right across the world. And I think some of the challenges that you as a chief and your executive team are going to face are going to be significant, but I know that you're going to do your best. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Do you have any other thoughts post-COVID with respect to?
Yeah, no, I think you've kind of, covered it. Oh, the other thing we're going to look at, sorry, this is just our business continuity. So now we had people working from home. People, some are more successful than others, but doing this whole telework. So we were forced to do it because we wanted to slow the spread of the virus within the police department. So now we have, and most of those are civilian staff, but we have staff that are set up working from home. So I think it's incumbent upon us to look at efficiencies and go, can people work from home? Can we introduce telework after COVID is done and actually find some efficiencies? The other efficiencies, Darren, is calls for service. We changed when police were responding face to face. So after COVID, are there some calls where we can now keep encouraging our citizens to report online? So again, look at online platforms. Also, look at telephone reporting and have an alternate response delivery where we're not going to send a police officer to that call, because during COVID, we actually found efficiencies in how police were responding to certain. Now, again, it's only certain types of calls. There's obviously going to always be a need where the police have to respond in person. But I think looking at the overall service delivery of the police department could actually find some efficiencies which may help us move forward.
I participated in an online discussion a couple of weeks ago, and there's no doubt out of COVID is going to be a fiery phoenix of opportunity, right, with respect to things learned. And, one of the things I heard clearly from business community is you know what, here I am paying $1 million in a lease to put 20 people in a building behind a cubicle working behind a computer, when in fact we're now proving that they can do the same thing at home if they want to. Therefore, why would I want to pay $1 million in a lease when I can take that $1 million and use it for something else to make my company more functional? And what I just heard you say is that as a police department, because like it or not, although you're a department, it is kind of a company at the same time, is you're learning some of those things as well.
Right. And the one thing, Darren, I wanted to say, you touched on a point earlier, and you said, there will be a new normal. Yeah. And I wanted to kind of touch on you. The way I look at it is there's two steps here. There's a world that we're going to have pre-vaccine. Yeah. So what does it look like when our provincial health officer talks about a slow transition to normalcy, but it's pre-vaccine? And then if and when a vaccine is developed, then we have post-vaccine. Yeah. And then what our world looks like post-vaccine. So I think there's a couple areas where we're learning to kind of protect ourselves, make sure that the second wave isn't going to hit us hard, and we're doing our part. But again, it's just, and this also is the challenge where we're dealing with the invisible enemy here. Yeah. When the Twin Towers went down in New York City during 9/11, there was a beginning, a middle, and a recovery phase. And everyone knew with a task at hand, as enormous as it was. But with COVID, we just don't know. There is no roadmap, which also creates added levels of stress and anxiety. And we have to be nimble and be able to adapt to what we perhaps don't even know where we may be a month from now.
Great comments. Sounds like maybe something you studied in your master's degree. Last question I have for you, Chief. Your final thoughts specific to social media safety and digital literacy while we navigate the world in changing events and just overall what's going on. Let's hear some thoughts.
Sure. So I really, in my heart, believe in the human spirit. I believe that all of us are wired to help each other, to be generous and kind, even when times are tough. And I'm just impressed with our communities and how we do come together. There's so many relief efforts and unselfish acts of kindness. Social media plays a key role in spreading that message. It can spread hope and that comfort and even the joy. No matter how difficult situations are, we are able to reach people in their homes, in their private settings, knowing we can't physically do that because of all the restrictions and the self-isolation and the quarantine rules that are kind of in place. So I think that there's been some humor involved in some of the things that we're doing to occupy our time during these unprecedented times during the pandemic. And I think maintaining kind of that sense of support, connection. We talk about social media platforms, video conferencing, similar to what you and I are doing. But families celebrating milestones and other events, doing it now through social media and learning about social media that perhaps they would never have done if this pandemic hadn't hit. So there's a lot of positives coming out of this, and in how resilient we are. And I always think that we're always a little stronger and better than what we give ourselves credit for. And I think we're starting to find that out a little bit, that if we really try hard and come together, that we're gonna all be able to get through this, but also get through it in a way that there's just this added level of kindness and support for one another.
Awesome, Chief. You know what? Stick around, because I just want to debrief at the end of this, but I just want to close to our viewers. Great interview. I mean, Chief Manak does a really good job in doing what it is. And some of his thoughts, I think, were important for our followers and our listeners to hear and see, right? It's amazing what actually goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people just don't see. So again, thank you for coming to this week's Thinkable Thursday for everybody who's viewing. And I really look forward to our next session next week. And don't forget to hit our YouTube channel, to follow us on our YouTube channel. So on behalf of myself, I'm Darren. On behalf of Chief Manak, and behalf of Brandon, who's working behind the scenes in the control booth right now, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you at next week's Thinkable Thursday. Bye now.